Welcome to the Deskbound Therapy Podcast, hosted by David London. David is a posture and mobility expert, yoga teacher, and certified online trainer. This podcast is about empowering desk-bound professionals, how to live their healthiest life, and move pain-free. Now, let's dive into this episode.
What is up, guys? Welcome back to episode 36 of the Deskbound Therapy Podcast. I'm your host, David London, and today I have a super exciting episode. My last episode on ergonomics was the top listen so far on the show, and based off your feedback, we brought some experts today. We have Erik Peper and Richard Harvey, authors of the Tech Stress book. We're going to talk everything ergonomics, posture, and about their new book. So I'm super excited about this because I wrote my own book a few years ago called the Deskbound Therapy Guide, which is similar. It was more like a PDF, but you guys have a full-fledged book on the topic. So really glad I was able to get a copy of that. Super excited to have you guys here today.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for the invitation to be on the show.
Yeah, it's really cool stuff. And it's cool that you guys are actually like doing the research in practice versus, you know, a lot of people just see what works for them or they buy that chair that has good advertisement. But you guys have been really doing it on the academic level, which is cool. So I'd love to hear about both of your stories, you know, how you got into writing the book and your backgrounds about where.
But let me start how it all came about. In the 1990s, there was a lot of repetitive strain injury and people had injuries and discomfort. And I was referred to a client to help another therapist out. And this person had the perfect ergonomic adjustments already. They had a good chair. They had the adjustment of the keyboard at the right height. Their eyes, you know, the top of the screen was right at the correct level for their eyes. And the person was miserable. Lots of neck and shoulder pain, etc. And it was obvious to me from our background that you could have the best perfect chair. It doesn't mean you will sit correctly or use yourself correctly. Just as if you have bad ergonomics, you have no opportunity to sit correctly. So what we then did is we monitored the muscle tension of the shoulders, the muscle tension of the arm, and then when the person sat and started to work, it became obvious. The whole time the person was mousing. In fact, their arm was slightly tense, their shoulder was slightly up, except they had no idea, and the ergonomist at that time who had assessed them had no idea either. So how the person was using itself was the issue. Then we taught the person using biofeedback to really become aware of that tension, to drop their shoulders, to be able to take small breaks, and all of a sudden the discomfort decreased. It's the same way when we look at the screen. All of a sudden we start looking at the screen. You know, we tend, if you can't quite see the Excel file or whatever it is, or the text on our email because the print is too small, we tend to start going forward, squinting our eyes almost. Then we hold our breath, we shallow breathe, and over time, we do this long enough, we get discomfort. And in fact, just like posture, we're unaware. And that led to our many different research projects. One of the recent projects we did, for example.
Wait.
Why don't you do yours first, right, Erik? On your mouse.
Yeah, let me tell you my story. I came in as a user. I was in computers and electronics, consumer electronic sales, and my staff complained about stress on the job, and they were getting ulcers and heart attacks and divorces and other symptoms of strain. The employer said, go take a workplace wellness class and solve all of the stress complaints of your employees. That was inadequate. So I quit the rat race, went back to school, and who was my teacher? Erik Peper.
There we go.
So I took his class, and among other things, the biofeedback techniques were great for stress in the workplace. So I traded stress workplace for stress in the school place, continued on for a doctorate level of training, and made my way to San Francisco State, where they have the holistic health program. It's one of the very few in the country. And among the types of research that we combine includes the ways that your mind and your body, your thoughts affect your physiology. And one of the ways that we know what we know is by systematically measuring things. And that's the biofeedback approach that Erik was mentioning. So how is it that we know that you have muscle tension? How is it that we know that you have eye strain? How is it that there's a good relationship between your body and the equipment, like the chair or your keyboard or your mouse or the lighting? It's because of the systematic studies evolving into what culminated into a book. And I'm going to stop there without telling you about the research that we've been doing.
No, I think one of the
But that's
research
sort of
studies,
the intro.
Rick, I would say one of the research studies is seminal as a conceptual way of thinking.
Right on.
People are sit in front of the keyboard and a mouse. Almost everybody does, or they use a trackpad. And this was really Rick's first study he did in this. It was really great. He did a nice controlled study in which he had the person with the mouse next to the keyboard and then just changed the width of the keyboard. You know, you can have a very wide keyboard with a number pad next to it, or you can have a narrower keyboard like a split keyboard. So basically, Rick just asked a simple question: is the location of the mouse, does it have an impact on you? People all basically were saying these ergonomic keyboards with a nice mountain looking hill was really great because of the number pad next to it. And it was obvious to us that the more you bring your arm to the side, the more tension which you have. And that is the critical part with both that biofeedback shows. You don't know it till it is too late. You don't sense it till the end of the day or days. And then you have the discomfort. The biofeedback makes the invisible visible, the unfelt demonstratable. That is the brilliance. So Rick's study, in a very quick summary, which was published is that he demonstrated when people used a mouse next to a wider keyboard, they had much more tension in their shoulders. Let me do this for the listeners, if possible, as a little experiment, if that is okay.
Go ahead.
But I like, as a listener, just for a moment, imagine taking a mouse in your right, let's say your dominant right hand, put it next to your keyboard. And with this mouse, in a moment, I'm going to ask you to draw the letters of your street address, except starting with the letter at the end. So you're going to draw them, the letters essentially in a backward order. So if my street address is Derby Street, I first draw the letter T, then I click, then I draw the letter E, then I click. Okay? And I keep doing this. Now I'm going to make this height of this letter less than, a half inch or 1 centimeter in height, no more. And so if you're now ready, now start drawing these letters as quickly as possible. Just start and do it quicker and quicker and quicker. Don't make a mistake, quicker. That's enough. What you observe is you probably held your breath. You found your shoulders tightening as you made these very small movements. You observed that your whole trunk stiffened, except you were totally unaware of this till we may have pointed it out to us. The biofeedback lets you monitor that and show it. And then that gives you the opportunity to change yourself. So that was one theme that underlies the book, the lack of awareness, the book has a number of practices how to become aware of this. The other one was, go on, Rick.
Hold on. Let me add in a little scientific jargon. One of the ways that people get strain and stress in their life is under time pressure. So when Erik just mentioned more quickly, quicker, try to do a very refined half-inch or a centimeter tall letter and writing it backwards, you're taking cognitive resources, your thoughts, and you're demanding something of someone under time pressure. Slowly, people can accomplish any tasks. Quickly, they might not be able to because it kind of overwhelms the system. The second category beyond time pressure is ambiguity or uncertainty. When you're not sure about what would happen if you made a mistake, when you're unsure about the directions that you're given. Now, what happens when we have time pressure and when we have ambiguity, especially in work-related tasks, is that our mental ability to focus on what we're doing compared to the mental ability to pay attention to the aches and pains in our body when we're holding our muscles tense or tightening our muscles, and then they get fatigued throughout the day, multiplied 8 hours of the day, we sometimes forget to pay attention to our body, to breathe, to adjust our posture. And why is Zoom fatigue so prominent or prevalent? Oh my gosh, my unstable connection came in. I don't know what's going to happen. That's ambiguity or uncertainty. Time pressure, I have to quickly fix the connections. Now my body braces and tightens, and depending on our ergonomic setup, we're going to get possible injury of our muscles. I'm going to stop there.
Well, Rick, you brought a very good point up of that tension. I want to keep emphasizing, almost all of us are unaware that we do that. I think that's the key till it's too late. Let me give an experience what happens for most of us kinesthetically. Because what happens in our what we observed in our research is that people tense. There's nothing wrong with tensing. The trouble is if you tense and you keep doing it for a long time unaware, you just have to tense a little bit for a long time and problems start. Let me give it by an example which everyone can do. If you're sitting, don't do it while driving, I can promise you that. Then what I'd like you to do is just lift your right knee just an inch up. So your foot just lifts off from the floor. Just hold it. It isn't that much effort. You know, most of us are quite strong. We use these muscles all the time for walking. Just keep lifting it. And already now you can probably start feeling some sensations in the hip flexors, in the hip. For some of you, it may become almost achy. Just keep doing this. You may have held your breath initially. I think that's probably long enough. You can do it longer. And how long you can hold it up depends how much we'll pay you. But basically, I think that's probably enough. So just let the leg relax. And notice you can feel the release in the muscle if you're lucky. And let the muscle totally release. Notice in this case, we tighten the muscle and we kept it tight and discomfort started to occur. Yet at the same time, we use these same muscles when we walk. We can literally walk for hours, tightening and letting go. Our muscles are made to tighten and let go. And when we work at the computer, so often we're captured by the screen, by the notifications, by the urgency, by the ambiguity, as Rick pointed out so exquisitely. And then we stay frozen almost in place. Our muscles are slightly tight. Just look at what happens to your finger, your index finger over your mouse, if you use one of those. Often the finger is just lifted in the air. It stays there for minutes and minutes at a time. And we tend to lift that finger. We not only tighten the forearm extensors, we often may tighten our shoulders, and we are totally unaware. And that is the key underlying part of the book, to become aware and to interrupt it. So one of the best interruptions you can do if you were just sitting this whole time is just do some movement. We now have sitting disease. So all you do, if you want to, interlace your fingers, let them be at your belly button, then bring your arms over your head in big swings for a moment. Just do some movement. And if you do that just for a moment, and then you can keep the fingers interlaced. Now point the fingers when they're at your belly button or lower at your waist downwards, and now the palms are outward, and now rotate. And be sure you keep breathing. And then you rotate the opposite way, or you can just roll your shoulders. It makes no difference what you quite do. It is the interruption of movement. And note that if you did this little exercise, all of a sudden, you feel maybe slightly more energized, slightly less tense. It isn't much, it's just a tiny bit. So that's another part. Our life is the alternation between excitation and regeneration. Rick.
I wanted to add in just a little bit of the scientific jargon as well.
Go for it.
If you think about your muscles of a couple of different varieties, sometimes they call them twitch versus fast twitch muscles. And the fast twitch muscles are the ones that enable us to do things very quickly, but for a relatively short period of time. So for example, if we want to snap our fingers, then those fast twitch muscles are able to spring into action, release their energy, so to speak, then come to rest so that they can replenish or restore whereas the slow twitch muscles are the ones that are more the endurance muscles. They are smaller muscle fibers, and they are longer to fit. They are resistance to fatigue compared to the fast twitch. Now, those fast twitch muscles come in two kind of flavors. The fastest twitching muscles, sometimes called type 2B or type 2X, are the ones that fatigue in roughly less than 30 seconds, so pretty fast. Whereas the type 2A, fast twitch, fatigue in a few minutes. So bringing back all that jargon, fast twitch muscles, and the book, when we recommend activities or exercises for participants, clients, for the general public, for our kids, for our friends and our family, those things that you can do in a very brief period of time, some call them micro breaks. Micro breaks are less than 30 seconds. That is to say, they allow those super fast twitching muscles to replenish and restore themselves. So just letting the blood flow return is part of the purpose, to get that blood, that nutrient fluid back to those muscles, compared to the few minutes that takes to replenish those slightly faster twitch. They don't fatigue at quite the same rate. But the point is, micro breaks, few seconds to 30 seconds or less, a few seconds versus a few mini breaks, increase the ability to pay attention to your muscles, especially those fast twitch muscles. And I'm going to stop there without going into too much more jargon about fatigue rates and things
Well,
like
Rick.
that.
Hey, my name is Ian. I've been working with David for about 2 months now. I initially came to him for some hip pain in my front groin, and then some back pain in my shoulders, in the back shoulders and the mid back. Since working with him, I've noticed a decrease in pain overall. In those two areas, I have noticed a better control of my shoulders, my scapulas in particular. Some really targeted growth there. Complete elimination in my groin area, increased mobility there. So what I noticed most and like about David is he designed something based upon feedback that I provide and what he notices in our one-on-one sessions. So I highly recommend working with him and giving him a shot.
You just pointed out that we observed when we did our studies with employees at San Francisco State in controlled studies where people did interventions, we taught it. And what was most interesting is that there were a number of people who were employees who were joined in this program where they learned these different skills using some biofeedback. And I'll never forget one of the men who said, I have no problems. You know, he didn't really. He worked at a computer, he had zero problems. And so we still persuaded him to do breaks. It took a little while, and there's a free program anyone can download called stretchbreak.com. That's stretchbreak.com. I don't get any money for it, and it's free. It's an app on your computer that can remind you to take breaks while working. Well, we persuaded him to do this. He came back the following week, almost with a smile on his face, and he pointed out, there's life after 5. And what he really meant was that all of a sudden, what he normally thought was basically being tired at the end of the day, the sense of low-level exhaustion, was no longer there by just taking these breaks continuously during the day. And he was equally, if not more, productive. And when we did our controlled studies, those people who were in the program versus those who were not in the program, they showed significant decrease in symptoms and optimization in health. The other piece, well, let me go for one more moment. The other piece we observed, which was very interesting, is that as we sit, we tend to start slouching. And the more which is normal, because we tend to, even in fancy, correct, ergonomically designed chairs, we very quickly tend to make our back curve. We lean back, our head slightly goes forward. We're in a slouched position. And if you do that for a long time, and that's our controlled studies again, when you're slouching and you look down, you tend to be more likely have access to negative and hopeless and powerless thoughts versus if you are sitting upright. Now, you cannot sit upright all the time. You need to alternate. But it's critical that posture has an effect. And what is so sad right now, when you look at young college athletes who are coming up, their spines are different than 20 years ago. They tend to be more curved. Their structure is the eye neck structure or the cell phone structure where they already are curving in their upper spine. That is the new normal. And what we observed in another series of studies, when we taught people to be aware of their slouching, and we're totally unaware of slouching. We have no idea that we are collapsing and looking and our spine curves. There's a great feedback device called the upright, which you can put on the person's spine and you can adjust it on your cell phone. And once you have calibrated for uprightness, every time you slouch, it will vibrate. And what is so nice, in a great study with Rick and Lauren Mason, we demonstrated that those people who wore that compared to the control group showed a significant improvement in health. Rick.
So that's what I was going to add, that when Erik mentioned the word upright, there's first, I have no connection to the product manufacturer. We're not, right? And the device itself is called Upright.
Upright Go.
And it's placed on the neck, whatever it's called, and placed on the neck, and it allows a person to get a gentle reminder in the form of a vibration, similar to how your smartphone might vibrate in your pocket on silent mode. Advantage of being reminded that you're slouching over, where your head is pulling the weight forward, and which would put pressure on the neck and the shoulder muscles. That's an excellent feedback device, or biofeedback, feeding information about your biology. There's another piece to remember, is that your whole body is dynamically in motion. So for example, were you to sit on one of those stress balls, you might add in movement into your day in your lower body and in your upper body. If you're on a long haul airplane flight, they always say do different kinds of stretching with your legs or a chair type of yoga. One of the pieces that Erik reminds me about is that the lower trunk, the lower part of your body, say your calf muscles, sometimes called the second part, because they return blood back up to your trunk, enabling the circulation to flow all around. We often tend to remind ourselves that if we are seated still in a meeting, then people won't see us wiggling and fidgeting. And the argument is just the opposite. Consider it an advantage to have a that permits freedom of movement so that you can get the blood circulating throughout your body. And so it's a relative, rather than being locked in place, so to speak, when the NASA astronauts first evolved, they were sort of immobilized, and they recognized that no, they have to build in some ability to get that blood and fluid circulating. I'm going to stop there, but it's a reminder that it's the whole body and the whole person.
Well, that reminds me in two ways. One that we have talked about is biofeedback as a reminder tool. There's some very economical ones, like we already talked about, which we did our research on with the Upright Go. The other ones is getting a better chair, adjusting the equipment around you, and a very cheap device I use. I'm sitting on it right now because I tend to slouch back as well, even in my good chair. I have a little seat insert. Yeah. I think in this case, like a back joint, and many other companies that make these. It's like a slant pillow by which my hips are really rotated in a way that I have more curvature in my back and I'm automatically more straight. But the real key is, that's the theme I think in our book, which I think really is one of our contributions, is we don't just look at it mechanically. We look at our behavior from an evolutionary perspective. And we're really saying, you know, when we move away from our evolutionary patterns, most likely illness or health occurs. And the simplest one we already explained was the one about movement. Human beings, for millions of generations, literally, or thousands at least, were moving. They would be hunting, gathering. They would sit sometimes, but they would almost never sit for days and not move. So when we don't move, most likely we could get help, discomfort. And the theme is we are continually reacting out of our evolutionary patterns or response patterns for survival. Let me give an example which is critical, and Rick can follow this up in a moment. And that is, how come I react so easily to all the notifications on my cell phone, on my screen? I automatically orient to them. I don't think about it. It happens automatically. And once we have become aware of that, then you realize, these notifications are really survival mechanisms. When I used to be walking in the savannah or through the jungle, whenever there's a small change somewhere, I hear a strange noise, I see something glimmering in the distance, I need to look, because that could be a friend or foe, it could be a predator, and I would react. And those people who would react would survive and reproduce. And so those are the mechanisms which really are predominant in us. And now the technology really activates these too much, and we are unaware that we are continually captured by it. That's why when a child plays computer games, all of a sudden, the mother says, it's time for dinner, and the child says, in a moment, and then another half an hour or 40 minutes passes because the child has been captured. And we call that process almost evolutionary traps. So some of the technologies have become traps that harm ourselves.
Yeah, one thing I really liked from the book is you actually talked about like tips for phone addiction and how to overcome that, because I think that's a big thing too. Like people will spend their whole day at their desk, and then they'll go home, be on their phone, or they'll be on their phone at the gym, and they're really never escaping that. And it's really another one of the struggles, is it's preventing people from doing other healthy activities with their life if they're just always addicted to that technology. And I also really liked how you guys talked about sleep too, because the technology really harms the sleep so much, especially myself. Like you guys know, with academia, and I'm in school right now too, like some days it can really affect your sleep.
Well, let me start, and then Rick will do the next piece.
Absolutely, go ahead.
There are at least two parts. One is the blue light projection from the screens. We forget that, and that suppresses melatonin, and that would interfere with sleep. That's part one. So that's easy to solve almost. You just don't watch these screens and half an hour or an hour before. Good luck if you're writing a paper for school or you're needing to finish a report. I realize those challenges. But two, what is equally important is that as we go to bed at night, we really want to quiet our brain, our emotions. We're sort of slowing down in a way. And what happens is when I look at a notification of social media, then at that moment I get emotionally and cognitively activated. And now I'm going to sleep with all that new stimuli in my brain. And that's the second part of sleep interference.
And let me add to that. The content is key, because depending on what the relationship is with what we're doing on the small screen of our phones or the bigger screens of our computers, we might trigger different emotional senses: anger, sadness, fear of different kinds. If you're worried, concerned, anxious, your anxiety kicks in, that sends a stimulant into your body that makes it go to sleep. And one of the pieces that we know from the evolutionary perspective, think about a time when people were living in caves, when something was outside of the cave that we were uncertain about, a predator, an enemy, we'd go, we'd tighten, we'd brace, we'd freeze. We'd stop moving our body in order to orient and try to pay attention to what was going on with the movement outside. That's partly, in a superficial way, why we have a hard time avoiding the fast movements, any screen of any kind. The second piece is called the resistance phase. We might metaphorically or even literally yell and scream and pound our chests, trying to scare off the bad guys or the predators. The last phase is this sometimes called fight or flight reaction. We try to get into a fight, or we try to run away because they're too big, they're going to eat us. Now, metaphorically, in the modern jungle, We don't get to run away when your boss says you got a deadline or your professor says you have a deadline. We only get to run away at lunchtime and at 6 o'clock. And then how often do you see fights going on? We're not quite as aggressive, despite what's going on in the popular press today. And so we get to grin and bear it, to hold it in. And that raises the question about these evolutionary traps. What do we do with all of those strong emotions? Well, we take them out on the keyboard, for example. Now, there are a few different types of devices. When you spend a couple $100 on a really outstanding professional style keyboard with Cherry MX, keys, and so for example, Kinesis, which I don't work for either, makes an outstanding keyboard. What it does is it reminds the body mechanically to give
awesome.
that feedback. Yes, and that way you can channel your emotions in a healthier way than the El Cheapo keyboards that are just there to make profits for the manufacturers rather than for interacting. And again, that's an argument that I'm making. I'm not providing evidence, but there are a number of credible studies that would suggest getting the better boards and the better mouses and the better equipment. It's the difference between price versus cost. And I'm going to stop there, but there's more on this transitional.
It is a sense of ergonomics and if you took back on that piece, first of all, on the keyboard, you want a keyboard ideally that's probably slightly split. So your hands, there's essentially a straight line from your
freedom of motion. Yeah.
And that is helpful for people. But the other pieces, I'm going to go back. We just finished sleep in a way. There are many things people can do. I'm going to summarize very quickly the 2 things to do minimally in terms of the work. 1, turn off all notifications on your cell phone. Turn off all the notifications on your screens, whatever. And a half an hour or 45 minutes before going to bed, do not use the screens. That's 1. 2, sleep in total darkness. From an evolutionary perspective, we slept in total darkness. It takes a little while. And if you are worried of tripping, like some people who are somewhat older may be worried about or can't see, put red lights, illuminate the room with red light. And now finally, I think another piece from an evolutionary perspective is how we look. The distinction is in the past, we would always look back and forth. We look at a tree, then we look nearby, then we look at a far distance. We forget that now we look at this 18-inch, 20-inch distance, just looking at a screen, and then we end up getting fatigue. Our eyes get really tired. We don't know it till the end of the day. And the reason is that we are only focusing on this near distance. A simple intervention is alternate. Look at the far distance, because when you look at the far distance, the eyes can diverge and relax.
Can I ask, go ahead. Usually in the last couple of minutes of and we're both professors, the question is, what did you learn today, David, that was new for you or interesting to you? And I'm curious what came up for you.
I think the biggest takeaway is really that what Rick was saying Erik was saying about how that actually arouses you. And I really liked what you were saying about how we have this physiological urge to move our bodies more, but we're really ignoring that by sitting at the computer all day. And I think that's really going to speak to, a lot of what people who are like, oh, why should I take a break? Or I can't remember to take a break. If we just keep educating them that this is, how the body is supposed to move, and these are really the effects it's having, I feel like people are going to be more inclined to, take more breaks into, even if it's 30 seconds. I think that's the big takeaway, is it doesn't need to be extravagant, but it's also just understanding what you're doing to your body. Because like even right now, in the past, I used to be in a lot of pain and discomfort, but now, I figured out what my body needs to, make it through the workday comfortably. I think it's just for people to figure out what works for them.
I would agree totally with you, David, except my experience is that even what we know it's often difficult to implement.
100%, yeah. We
get captured by the material. So it really takes training and a conscious awareness. It helps. And I think the one nice part about our book is we give a framework of this evolutionary perspective, and then cognitive and behavioral tips by which you can really optimize both performance, which is the critical part, and to mobilize your health.
So where can people find your book?
Our book is sold by any book dealer, bookstore.
Pangdom, Random House, North Atlantic Press, and all the booksellers. It's
It is called Tech Stress: How Technology is Hijacking Our Lives, Strategies for Coping, and Pragmatic Ergonomics. Any bookseller or even Amazon, and then Amazon obviously sells it as well.
Awesome. Yeah, I've read it, the first part so far, but I'm really excited to get to that second part about coping. Thanks so much for coming on, guys. I'm looking forward to chatting again soon. I hope the book's doing well.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, David.
Have a fabulous Sunday.